Good evening, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to another edition of What's Happening. I'm George Binns, and I'm here with my co-host, Elliot Margolis, and we have as our guest this evening the Councilor from Ward 4, Scott Houseman.
How you doing, George? Thank you. Good to be here.
The issue I think we want to talk about is the state of the city.
Okay.
And there's been a lot of discussion, a lot of ink in the paper about all the building that's going on and what's the direction we're going to go in. And there's a Plan Beverly that's been worked on for about a year now. And I don't think it's going to satisfy all the concerns, but what are you hearing from your constituents?
Well, you're one of them.
Yes.
And I have a fairly good sense of where you're coming, but we'll talk about that.
Yeah, I've already buried you in paper. Yeah.
Well, I mean, I have certainly seen and heard from my constituents sort of the dichotomy of residents who think that the building that's going on Rantoul Street is great, and that the downtown area along Cabot Street is vibrant. And they like sort of the more urban vibe, if you will. That's over on one side. Yeah. And then you have folks on the other side who very much feel that too much, too soon, too big, too fast. So as a city councilor, I hear both. I certainly understand from the administration's point of view, the perspective of economic imperative, because the city funds its services in substantial part through what's called new growth, or essentially an increased tax base, if you will. And the city has unfunded liabilities, as do all cities in the Commonwealth, probably most of the cities in the country. And so we're under a financial obligation to fully fund, for example, our pension liability, which is about $83 million unfunded, by the year 2032. We have streets and roads that it's hard to come up with enough money to sort of keep on top of their condition. They need constant maintenance, plus we have to sort of backfill a lot of neglect for the streets and sidewalks for a long time. We're building a new police station to the tune of $27 million. Yeah. And all of that takes money. There's sort of an economic imperative from city government to be able to provide the services people are looking for, and that gets paid through from taxes. And so, we have this desire on the part of municipal government to make sure that we have sufficient new growth to keep providing the services that folks want.
Well, you brought up this new growth, and it sounds like magic. How does that actually work? Well,
let's just take a new building that Wendover builds down on Rantoul Street. It's worth X number of millions of dollars. The city it's a new building. It's on the tax rolls. It wasn't there the year before once it's built. And so that provides additional revenue for the city that it didn't have previously. So that, in sort of simplistic terms, is new growth.
But the question is, people, I mean, I'm hearing from people, they're getting tired of all the taxes.
Yep.
It's the city taxes, it's the state taxes, it's the federal taxes.
Yep.
They're talking about increasing the gas taxes. When is the city council going to stop being responsible with our money?
Well, I guess it depends on your definition of responsible. So I don't remember who said it, if it was Benjamin Franklin or someone else, but there's nothing certain in life but death and taxes. We will always have taxes. The only question is how much. And certainly, I know that you and I suspect certainly to a substantial degree, George, feels like we have too many taxes. I get that. When I was in my first term, so I've just started my fifth term as a city councilor, And I'm not a numbers guy in the sense I'm not a numbers whiz, but Matt St. Hilaire and I both were interested in finding out what happens if instead of raising our taxes on an annual basis 2.5%, which is what the city is allowed to do, but also capped to on an annual basis, what would happen if we raised it, 2.4 or 2.3? If nothing else, giving some kind of symbolic, if not substantive, relief to the taxpayers to show that that the city council cares about that. The calculation that we got back is that the difference in someone's tax bill, if we did say 2.4 instead of 2.5 a year, would be something like $20. So I'll leave it to you to talk with the finance directors whether or not the calculation is right.
But statistics lie. Okay.
Okay. That's a conversation you could have with the finance director. But
I understand. But what I'm saying is,
yeah.
some places, some homes or some buildings will go up 4 or 5%, and others will go up 1.5% to get to your 2.5%, figure. Mm-hmm. So 2.5% is not necessarily a true figure for a lot of people.
Well,
and when you're in a when you are in a income that your income stays the same, and then you hear like when you guys voted for the meals tax and things like that, said, well, it's only a cup of coffee a week. How many cups of coffee do people have to give up? What percentage of their income do they have to give in taxes when you talk about the whole shebang of taxes? Mm-hmm. So my suggestion, I understand growth in the city. I understand that. We just spent millions and millions of dollars on new schools. Had they been maintained properly, we wouldn't have had to spend it. So therefore, my question would be, when is the city council going to be responsible with our money?
Well, from my point of view, we are responsible with your money and with the taxpayers' money, but it comes down to a degree to a sort of a philosophical difference between what is responsible. So the mayor, our form of government is strong mayor, weak council. The mayor, the council's control over the city budget is limited to being able to deduct things from the mayor's budget, subtracting expenses. We cannot add to it, and we cannot shift around where the proposed budget allocates its expenditures. So what we can do is we can cut, and like I said, I had this conversation my very first term, if we were to cut back to 2.3 or 2.4, the difference on a per person or per taxpayer basis would be quite modest, but it would have a big impact overall on the city's ability to provide, street improvements, street repair, fire, police, you name it. For example, in Beverly, we have about the same population as the city of Salem. We have 68 police officers. Salem has 98 police officers. We do with much less the same work for our residents that the city of Salem does on the police force. So there are certainly ways in which Beverly runs a very lean operation in terms of providing services, and certainly, if philosophically you don't care about the services or you're okay with cutting back services, then taxes could be cut back. But not everyone would agree with you that it makes sense to cut the taxes with a commensurate cut in the services that would
well, I think
result.
part of the problem comes down to one of, we see a tax bill 4 times a year, and we see the number come up dramatically different, $100, $200 a year on your tax bill. And that is quite obvious what's happening. What we don't see is I guess the old joke about potholes will never get filled until it becomes a political photo op. So that doesn't, some of the things the city is doing don't get the visibility that is commensurate with the kind of increases we're seeing in our taxes. And I know I sent you a pile of paper in anticipation of this show. And there's a whole bunch of issues that I think that need to be discussed, and they aren't discussed, and things just slide
Well,
on.
we're discussing them now.
Yeah, I understand.
Let's go to your point about what's visible about where our taxes go. So since the Scanlon administration and continued with the Cahill administration, we took the emphasis really has been a lot on infrastructure for schools. So to Elliot's point, if maintenance had been done properly through the years, that's precedes me by probably decades, okay? So I can't really speak to what didn't happen or should have happened back then, but as a representative of the taxpayers, I take the world as I see it, as I find it, and I don't think there's any question, there's certainly no question in my mind that, that the Briscoe Middle School was in deplorable condition from the point of view of providing an adequate facility for teaching. I think we needed a new middle school.
Oh, yeah.
Our police station is over 100 years old. It basically is condemnable. It never passes inspections. We need a new police station. But the emphasis really has been up until now on improving, expanding the elementary schools, building a new high school, building a new middle school. So there is a tangible result that you can see. Now, whether you agree that that's money well spent is another question.
Yeah.
But all of those things cost money. The new middle school share on the city's budget is $60 million. Like a mortgage, it's on your house, it's spread out over time. But there are tangible results for the taxpayer's dollar. I think from my point of view as a city councilor, one of the interesting questions is what's the right balance between providing, spending the city budget, whether you like the taxes or not, the revenue is coming in, whether the appropriate balance is struck between spending on school infrastructure and school services for students and teachers versus road repair or anything else sort of, if you will, on the municipal side of the budget. Is that the right balance that's being struck? Because certainly under this administration, the municipal side of the budget has been more or less level funded. And the increases, the new growth has largely gone to provide additional services, additional funding for education-related matters. So if you're a person who does not have kids or has kids, long gone, it is very easy to say this is a big tax burden. I don't like my taxes going up every year. Yeah. Why should we be doing this? But if you're a young family who's moved to Beverly, or just a young family with kids, you really have a very strong sense of where your tax dollars are going.
Yeah.
So
I think that's one of the issues that we get into is that when you start to talk about this Plan Beverly.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, let's talk about the Plan Beverly.
It starts out as though, okay, we're going to get a bunch of expats out of Boston who can't afford to live there, and they're going to move into these condos and apartments around the train stations, this transient-oriented development routine. That's nice. And if Beverly remains the city that it is, it's very attractive. Some of those people are going to say, hey, why don't we buy a house and live here? And then we get into the issue that, the mayor is saying that we've got 700 new housing units have been built. How many of them are affordable houses? And I think this is where the focus needs to be put on this Plan Beverly of, my perspective is that anybody that works in Beverly ought to be able to live here. And we shouldn't turn into a small version of Boston where anybody that works here has got to live someplace else.
I doubt there's anyone who would disagree with you on that. But it's not as simple. It's not as simple to say that's the way it should be.
Why not?
Okay.
It's the buts that start to get to
So
you.
it's really it's not simply a Beverly issue, and not simply a Beverly challenge. It is a challenge statewide.
Yeah.
It's a very big picture macro problem, and when I originally moved to Boston or the Boston area some 34, 35 years ago, people look down on Somerville, for example, right? Somerville is considered today a very attractive place to live. And Medford the same way. Now housing is becoming more in demand as the economy provides more and more jobs.
It's called gentrification.
And I see it just simply moving up the commuter rail line basically. And if it isn't Beverly's turn now, it certainly will be soon. But I would say it's Beverly's turn now. It's an attractive community. It's not an unreasonable commute to downtown Boston, and housing prices are going up all around the state, not just in Beverly.
Yeah.
So we're just experiencing our version of the same problem that all of the cities and towns in the greater Boston area are
just
having.
because everybody's got the same problem doesn't mean you can't solve it or you can't work on it.
Well, I don't think we can solve, personally, I don't think we can or should try to solve all of the state's housing challenges in one city, our city. Okay? So the Plan Beverly is drafted with the idea that, one, we need affordable housing. And I should just say for the record that under our zoning ordinance, new developments, or new developers, I should say, are required to provide a 12%, I think it might be 10%, but I think it's 12% affordable housing. Typically what developers do is, rather than providing that on site, they pay a certain amount into an affordable housing trust fund, which the city has, and that money gets deployed off-site for affordable housing. I would prefer to see affordable housing on site. I'd prefer that to be at least partially a requirement, not simply allowing the developers to buy out. But as it stands right now, that is the system.
That's the way the game is played.
Yeah, that's right.
Yeah.
Now, does that solve our affordable housing problem? No, it does not.
No.
The prices are going up everywhere, and so the Plan Beverly, at the stage it is now, because they still haven't rolled out the first draft, is sort of in still a very large concept stage.
Yeah,
provides for, calls for, I should say, doesn't provide for. It calls for affordable housing, and it calls for trying to solve that in part by allowing more housing units to be built for perhaps rezoning certain areas like the Bass River or up in North Beverly, to have mixed-use housing where right now there's only retail stores. So the idea is, and also allowing relaxing accessory housing throughout the city. Every zoning district under the principles as they stand presently would have relaxed zoning so that you could have a non-family member accessory unit built in single-family residential neighborhoods. I expect that to be a hotly debated issue. But right now, the Plan Beverly says that it's an important goal to have affordable housing, and that the way we do that is to change the zoning so that we can basically have more housing units built.
Okay, but the part of the problem with that is the city loses money on most housing that we have because let's just say it costs $12,000 a year to educate every kid.
I
Okay?
accept your proposition. It is a money-losing proposition by and large for households that have kids. Typically are a net loss for the city in terms of revenue. They cost more to provide services for than they produce in revenues. I accept in principle that proposition. I've heard that a lot. Again, I don't have the calculation background to sort of prove that or not. But so what's interesting, so I had a meeting just this past week with the new superintendent, Superintendent Turocek. She told me something really, really interesting, that the new housing down in Rantoul Street, there has been concern, and people will still maybe argue that those units would bring in a lot of kids, which would impact, you wouldn't even need a lot of kids, but enough kids to impact enrollment in the schools, to make the schools that we have just redone still too small. But what she said is very interesting. So in the Hannah School area, what they're finding this year is that a lot of, I suppose, maybe empty nester households have moved, hopefully downsized to somewhere in Beverly, we can hope, but have been filled with young families. And so we have existing housing stock, and the enrollment in the Hannah area for new students has increased very substantially. I don't have the numbers off the top of my head because she and I were having more general conversation about that. So, people are entitled to buy, young couples are entitled to buy housing and have kids and live in Beverly. What are you going to do? I mean, the city has to provide, by law, if nothing else, has to provide an education and services for those families and those students. So, Ellie, what is your solution to that?
My solution is to build more industrial areas.
Okay.
Because when you have corporations or industrial areas, you collect taxes, and you really kind of screw the businesses by charging them at 175%. So you're making all this money on those properties, and you're giving them next to no services.
So I'm glad to hear that you are in favor of taxes, at least in some circumstances. You want to have commercial enterprises which you can tax. The tax rate.
I didn't say that, but
you said that your solution would be to have industrial properties where you can get more tax revenue, right?
Industrial property, we collect taxes and we don't have to spend on them like we do on single-family homes. That's what I said.
So you'll be happy to hear that in addition to affordable housing goals, Planned Beverly. Now, mind you, Planned Beverly is run by essentially through the planning department with the direction of the mayor. So as a city councilor, I participate in Planned Beverly just like you do. I'm no different in that respect. I have no involvement in it other than to try to follow it as closely and participate in the workshops and so forth. But one of the Planned Beverly principles is to do just that, is to encourage more commercial development. So it's not just industrial, it's commercial in general. The tax rate on commercial properties in the city is and has been for as long as I've been a councilor and well before, roughly double that for the residential rate. So you do make much more money, much higher taxes because the tax rate is twice that roughly for commercial enterprises. And Planned Beverly does provide for specific proposals to encourage that. So for example, whether you agree that this is the appropriate place or not, that's a reasonable question, I think, but along River Street, say between the Odell Veterans Park down by the Beverly Depot and Route 62, that whole area there is it is proposed to have be rezoned and provide incentives and different zoning to encourage more commercial development there. Now, there's already a lot of commercial development there, but it's small shops, right? Planned Beverly, as I read it, would seek to encourage more dense commercial development there, higher, more, bigger. It also calls for preserving small businesses, and so to my way of reading, it seems like there's a conflict in the Planned Beverly principles in that respect. Yeah. But to your point, the city is well aware that we want to have more commercial enterprises because it's a tax gain.
Well, there's Folly Hill. What are you going to do about that?
I'm not going to do anything about it. I will wait for the administration, if there's development up there, to come to City Council and say, here's the nature of the problem. Here's how we propose to solve it. Right now, it's sort of on hold.
I've been watching this city for like 50 years. I've been a little longer than
20, 20 more than me. So.
Yeah, and Up until this past year, I can only remember one time where the city council overrode a proposition by the mayor, and that's when they wanted to take funds out of the sewer fund and buy a street sweeper.
I think that must have been before my time
Yeah,
on the council.
Yeah, they got the street sweeper anyway, but they didn't use that funds. And then this year, I was very impressed that you guys decided that, no, you can't take the money from the school system to pay for the kids that go outside the city, and you got to use it in our own school system.
Yeah.
So I would like to see more of this where the city council starts to influence the process a lot more, because you're the ones that are getting more of the input than the mayor.
Well, I'll say this to that. The city council, there's 9 city councilors.
Yeah.
Each city councilor has their own perspective or their own way in which they, represent the public. I take, generally speaking, a very activist role as a city councilor. Yes. I question a lot. I push a lot. In my previous 8 years as city councilor, I was the only city councilor that twice put a hold on a vote that the mayor wanted to be taken. I did that to slow down the process so there could be more deliberation and more answers for the council. So, and now we have a new council. We have 3 new city councilors. And I think you probably, would be my guess, is we'll have a more robust kind of atmosphere at City Council with the discussions with the administration. So I think that's a very good thing for the council to be more independent and more outspoken and just stronger as a legislative body.
As a last question, because we're running out of time, we're talking about the state of the city. I noticed quite a few people ran unopposed. That tells me that people don't want to run because it doesn't seem as if they can accomplish anything, they could do anything.
Well, that's one way of looking at it.
It seems to me that we need a new charter, and the charter has to have, number one...
Charter review this term. It's happening this year.
We need term limits. We need a 4-year mayor, not a 2-year mayor, because the mayor is never... He's always running. He needs to get... If a new mayor comes in, what happens is the first 6 months of his term, he's using somebody else's budget. So he's only got, puts his first budget in and has a year before he has to start running for re-election. Doesn't make sense to me. You have 30 seconds.
Well, you're in luck. This is a year in which, actually 2 terms, a 2-year term in which the charter review is going to occur. And so the opportunity to have those kind of discussions about those kinds of changes, I think, will very much be on the table.
Who's going to set up this committee that does it?
2 city councilors, Stacey Ames, Chairman Councilor Tim Flaherty, will be starting that even as we speak and putting together the composition of the Charter Commission.
Okay.
Oh, good.
You're looking for
I'll have to give
volunteers?
Stacey Ames a call because I would love to be on that commission.
All right.
In any case, thank you very much
Here we
for
go.
being on the show. This was
It's a pleasure.
great. Good
Yeah, it's a pleasure.
information.
Thank you
Good
for the
discussion.
invitation.
We appreciate it, and I hope you enjoyed it, because we're going to have more shows like this talking about the state of the city with a number of different councilors. And our job is to make you more informed, and that's what we're trying to do. Thanks for watching.